Church, today I'm going to talk about an evolving topic. And it's something that we've been wrestling with for some time now, not just this pandemic or the past year. And that topic is community. And as we begin today, I want us to be mindful of the ways in which the spiritual discipline of community is present or absent from our lives. I'd like us to wrestle with the ways in which our practices have changed this year, either for the good or bad, and how we have encountered Jesus and remained in him, even in our new and temporary structures of gathering. Community is how we experience Jesus. We can't remain grafted to the vine on our own. It's imperative for us to embrace our fellow community members in a loving and authentic way. God created us to be alongside other people, to love them as he loves them. I love the way that screens and virtual communities have kept us connected to each other, just like this. They're such a valuable tool and make it possible to stay connected right now. Like most of us who are active online, I have several groups that are specific to just me and my lifestyle. I'm in a really great women's ministry group with pastors from all over North America, and it's such a great place for me to seek advice and encouragement. I'm in a youth pastors groups, I'm in a few moms groups, and those are really cool too. For some reason, I am in a Moms Who Run group, but I'm reasonably sure that one was an accident. And there's a lot about these groups that I love. The people immediately identify with the things I struggle with and with the things I celebrate. They just get me. I don't have to worry about not being seen because nearly everyone in the group has had the same experience as me. I love them. When I'm logged in, I feel really safe. I choose them because God didn't design us to be alone. God designed us to be immersed into community. And quite frankly, this year, it's been easier to stay logged into online forums than it has been to acknowledge the loneliness we might be facing, even in the midst of our families and homes. But what's interesting about these groups is that they're not authentic to our experience when we log out. Not really. When we're logged in and encountering these groups, we're putting ourselves into an echo chamber of similar ideas with no room for growth, disagreement, or reconciliation. These experiences of community can also be called social enclaves, a place where you can cloister in with similar ideas and experience, with no risk of real offense. And within the last 11 or 12 months, our experience of these types of groups is on the rise. And on top of our move away from physical gathering, friends and families have been worn thin or torn apart as views on elections, race, vaccines, faith, and the like are expressed online with the ability to sit across the table from one another. It's easier to hurt people online and get away with it. Because these things have shifted, maintaining the diversity of our community is difficult. It's hard or impossible to have dinner with your extended family or your church community. So instead, we allow all this noise from these social enclaves or echo chambers and wonder how to grasp at the people living next door. And that noise, although well-meaning, weighs heavy sometimes. I've deleted a ton of social media apps off my phone in the last few months and unfollowed or left Facebook groups, all in an attempt to figure out where I want my true community coming from. It's so distracting and fatiguing to have these groups or pages or alerts constantly running in the background. And yet, God has used these spaces to teach me. He has used these social enclaves to teach me about my desire for a robust community filled with people with different experiences, people that sometimes disagree with me. And I hope that that experience brings spiritual deepening and growth within that diversity. Jesus calls us back to him in order to experience true and fruitful community. Heather read us a passage, and we're in a really dense passage today in the Gospel of John in chapter 15. So I'm going to be breaking it down a ton. In John 15, we get a picture of what biblical community really looks like. In our passage, Jesus gives instructions to his disciples regarding community. And if you've got your Bible handy, I'm going to be going to 1 John 13 and then head to our passage in chapter 15. This passage is part of a larger section called the Farewell Discourse, which is exactly what it sounds like. Jesus is giving a goodbye speech. He knows that his time with his beloved friends is drawing to a close. The Farewell Discourse starts a few chapters back in John 13, and they're sharing a meal together. And we see this meal represented in other Gospels as well. For example, in Matthew chapter 26, we get a very clear picture of the Last Supper at the Passover festival, in which Jesus shared the bread and the cup. But in John, Jesus does something unique. He washes their feet, a task typically left to either the individual or a lowly servant, not a rabbi, and certainly not the Son of God. After dinner, Jesus and the disciples leave, and he picks up this new thread. And he says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. These verses are really interesting. There is beautiful natural agricultural imagery and a bit of poetic license. And here in the Okanagan, the imagery of vines and branches are something we're familiar with. We've seen the way that branches connect to the vine. But for the disciples, it's so much bigger than the agricultural imagery. For devout Jews, like the disciples, the vine is Israel, God's chosen people. God brought them out of Egypt, planted them in fertile soil, and yet in the stories of the Old Testament, we see time and time again that they don't yield fruit. They break away from the vine by breaking God's commands. They abuse power. They don't grow. Jesus uses this language in order to reveal more about his nature. These first few verses also tell us about the character of God. God is a gardener. God is sustaining and creative, and the reason the recipients of his care can flourish. Jesus tells his disciples, look, I'm the vine, the source of life for all the branches. And God is the one who is responsible for caring for me and everyone who is in me, which is to say, disciples, you're not in charge. Church, we're not in charge. And I wonder if we're really living this way, or if we're getting caught up in a need to control and manage. Do our days loaded with activities and busyness, or in this season, maybe the desire to get back to busyness, reflect our need to control? Certainly, our need for control is demonstrated in the way that we choose the social enclave on Facebook over our tangible community right in front of us. It's easier to control our responses when there's no one to disagree with. But we are not the gardener, And it is not our job to ensure the branches look the way that we want them to. As Jesus continues with his disciples, he tells them every branch that bears fruit, he prunes to make it more fruitful. He's repeating that word, prune. It's important. Jesus is telling his disciples that they should be ready and have an expectation of pruning, that no matter how good or awesome you might think you're doing, you will be pruned. This means that sometimes we are going to hold on so dearly to something that we think is just amazing, and God might choose to cut it away in order to allow for growth and deepening. That missed job opportunity might give you a chance to go back to the drawing board in the best way. And this doesn't mean that every pain is pruning. Sometimes bad stuff happens, but everyone can expect pruning. Everyone will endure some sort of pressure or pain that will in turn be used by God, the gardener, to help them grow and bear more fruit. I like the way my friend Kyron says it. You've got to break a glow stick to see it glow. I love that. You need to experience a break before you can begin to glow. The Bible tells us that God works all things to our good. This is true even in the painful process of pruning, especially within the context of a diverse biblical community. As we move on from here in verse 4, Jesus tells his disciples that they must abide in him. And this word abide is thought-provoking. In our contemporary language, we might think it means merely following the rules, as in, I'm a law-abiding citizen. I don't run red lights. I don't steal. Yet Jesus is telling his friends to remain in him. Theologian and pastor Lindsay Armstrong says it like this. On his final night, Jesus is preparing his disciples for a time when he will no longer physically be with them. Abide, he counsels. Remain with me as I remain with you. Continue with me as I continue with you. Dwell with me as I dwell with you. Endure with me as I endure with you. Be present with me as I am present with you. And what I love about this call to abide is the way that Jesus asks his disciples to endure. He is doing it from a place of desiring communal love, not consequence. This isn't a command to obey his laws or else, but rather to endure in him. It's also really interesting to note that in this passage, it says, I am the vine and you are the branches. In all those yous, that you is plural. He's saying the whole gang, you must abide in me. You are the branches. He's saying y'all are the branches. The invitation to endure within the framework of community that has been grafted to Jesus Christ. We will be cared for by both the vine who gives us life and the gardener who enables the fruit of that life. Abide, remain, dwell, endure, be present, all within the diversity of community. As Jesus continues his farewell, he tells his beloved community of disciples, apart from me, you can do nothing. And that sounds harsh, but this is a reminder, and it's a caution and an encouragement. It reminds us that we are emboldened by Jesus and that we are in the midst of God's work, not our own. In faith, we are inherently bound to one another in community. In faith, we are inherently bound to Christ. Whatever ministry endeavor that you are a part of, whether it be at church, caring for a colleague at work or at school. Our mission is to remain in Jesus in deep community with believers, with God's common call to us at our center. And we can't look around at other communities and see their successes as more valuable than ours, or our failures as more catastrophic than ours. We are all part of God's plan. We are all unified in the true vine of Jesus Christ. If we keep going to verses 9 through 12, we have a reminder of Christ's love for us, the way he interacts with us. He tells his disciples, "As the Father has loved you, so have I loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. I have told you this so that your joy may be complete. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you." What's neat about this command is Jesus has already said this to his followers at the beginning of the evening together. And if we go back to chapter 13 in John's gospel, Jesus tells his disciples, "A new command I give you. Love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another." And the gospel writer of John talks about this command in a few other places as well. Notably, in his letter, 1 John, in chapter 3, verse 23, he says, "And this is his command, to believe in the name of his Son, Jesus Christ, and to love one another as he commanded us." This love, this authentic digging into one another's lives, is a command. Like the words abide and prune, this command is repeated because it's important. Jesus wants it to sink in. He needs his followers to really hear it. This is huge. Jesus commands those grafted to him, the true vine, who are abiding and remaining in him, to love like he does. And when you think about the ways in which Jesus loved, this is a big task. He took the role of the servant and washed his friends' feet. He cared for the oppressed and the marginalized. He fed the poor. He healed the sick. He comforted the lonely. He ate with sinners. He validated women. He grieved with his friends, and he wrestled with the rules of the status quo. This command to love one another as Jesus loved us has the potential to influence the church for so much good. We can break down the walls of social enclaves and other barriers that we put up so that we too can care for the oppressed and the marginalized, that we too can feed the poor, help care for the sick, comfort the lonely, eat with sinners, validate women, grieve with our friends, and wrestle with the rules of the status quo. Our community would experience fruit like we've never seen before. This passage is about letting go of the control that we want over community and allowing community and Jesus to form us for the better. And this is hard, but Jesus sets out expectations. Jesus said to abide in him, not as an individual, but as a community bound together, not as an individual branch, but as a collection. This means we look different, we are shaped different, we think different, and yet if we endure in him, the true vine who gives us life, we receive the loving and tender care of the gardener who sustains all of us through Jesus, whom we are grafted to. And sometimes that abiding hurts. Sometimes we do feel the pressure points and the growing pains. Sometimes our glow sticks need to be broken. We need to be pruned in order to grow. God the gardener prunes people And those who remain in the vine will experience growth and fruit because of that pruning. And finally, as we look towards our community, its health and its deepening, we need to love like Jesus loved. And this means we need to do those same things that he did. We need to look beyond our echo chambers and social enclaves, from the busyness of meaningless activity, and enter into deep relationship. Imagine if your community wasn't merely the people that you saw once a week in a breakout room or passed by in the hallway at work or at school, but rather people that you deeply cared about. Imagine your community took seriously their grafted to Christ nature and remained in him together. Imagine what would happen if we witnessed the painful process of pruning and growth, and we came alongside those people and loved them like Jesus asked us to. Imagine if we dug into the weird and vital intimacy of diverse community. Imagine if you silenced those apps on your phone that called out to you and pulled you out of a real world chance to dig into community that Christ made with his disciples. Imagine if we remained in Jesus with the intention of pruning away all the ways in which we have been taught to avoid connection this past year. So I'd like to ask you, church, where are your social enclaves? How do you seek out respite from the diversity of real community? How do you avoid pruning and growth? I would encourage you to think of the ways in which you can make some lasting changes in your narrative that allow you to immerse yourself into relationships with others, especially those you don't necessarily have everything in common with. It can be as easy as combing through your Facebook groups and culling out those that add noise only and no vibrancy. My hope and prayer for this year is a deepening of community. And to our guests here today, I'm praying for the deepening of your community too. I'm praying for all communities to display grace and growth, to come around those who are experiencing the pain of pruning and to celebrate that resulting growth. And I'm praying that we can move out of a global pandemic that has taught us how to isolate and into a year filled with connection and the spiritual discipline of partying and hugging and kindness and grace.